Trigger warning. In this two-part episode, we discuss sensitive topics including real murder cases, infant death and elder abuse. If you may be triggered by this, please do not watch.
Hi everyone, welcome to Spooky and Kooky podcast.
This is part 2 of episode 6. If you like the content, give us a like and subscribe. We're going to jump straight in where we left off and continue with the story of Dorothea Puente.
So they bring John in for questioning, and John basically says, I don't know what happened to Bert.
Yeah.
But
Something
I can
ain't
tell
right.
you it's been months since I've seen him, so something isn't right here. At that point, the police thought, let's do a background check on Dorothea. Let's see what she's about. And to their horror, they saw all of the convictions that she had, her past of cashing in these checks, of drugging people, vulnerable people.
Running little schemes and scams and... Yeah.
So they did a search of her property, which uncovered pills for sleeping disorders.
Okay.
And they thought, well, that's not adding up, and that's very much linked to her past.
Yeah.
So Judy was still very concerned by that comment that John made about she's digging holes.
Yeah.
So she really pressed the police to start looking in the garden.
Yeah.
So they said, right, Dorothea, are you happy for us to start digging in your garden? And she was like, yeah, if you want.
I mean, it's going to waste your time, but...
If you want to. So I'm just a sweet old lady. I don't know what you expect to find.
It's just a vegetable patch out there.
So they started digging, and at first they found a lot of rubbish, like eggshells, bits of plastic. Then they started to find cloth, and then they started to find what looked like pieces of leather. Plot twist, it wasn't leather. They eventually started hitting bones that were wrapped up in plastic and duct tape. And the leather was human skin that had come away from the skeleton. Yeah. So at that point, they bring Dorothea in for questioning. And she said, I don't know anything about this. I know nothing. It's not me.
Grandma
this was
Dorothea.
probably, if you can find out what date this happened, like probably predates when I even moved in here. I don't know. So
Just admit it at this point.
yeah. So the police just kept excavating the garden. And Dorothea said, look, am I under arrest? Because if I'm not under arrest, I really want to visit my nephew in a coffee shop and I want to get him a coffee. And the police officer said, sure, you go to the coffee shop. We'll keep digging up your garden that we've already found some skeleton in. It's fine. So Dorothea went off to the coffee shop. Lo and behold, they found more human remains. And the officer in charge said, where's Dorothea? We've found another body. And he was like, well, I'll just go to the coffee shop and get her. Well, she was not there. She did a runner, basically.
Well, yeah, that was obvious.
Yeah.
Even if you had just been brought in for questioning of these things happening in your home, you would not be like, oh, I really want to go see my nephew at the coffee shop. I'll just come back to the police station later when you've got more questions for me.
Yeah. So she was on a run, so a massive manhunt ensued. They put out a bolo for her across every police force in the entirety of the United States. She was on the news. Everyone was keeping an eye out for her. But in the meantime, they continued, as I say, digging up the garden. And they found quite a long corpse, which they believed to be Bert. Fresher corpses as well, which goes against what she said, predates me. And one of the officers was walking throughout the house and he thought, oh, this carpet feels really spongy.
Oh, no.
And then he realised there's 2 carpets on this floor. So he pulled back one of the carpets to find an absolute bloodbath, and it stunk of decay. And they believe that's where she was actually prepping all of the bodies.
Right.
And then just putting the other carpet back over the top.
That's so unsanitary. Why would you want to live like that?
Yeah. So it also came out that she was very smart. She knew exactly what she was doing. She really played into that grandma role.
Yeah.
And she actually would make herself, through her dress, through her hairstyle, her hair colour, look older than she was. So she looked about 70. That was 15 years older than what she actually was. And so she would constantly refer to herself being as an old lady, but it was all just to avoid suspicion of
So she was
people
55.
around her. She was in her, she was in her 50s.
That's mad.
So, yeah, they discovered all of that in the carpet, everything like that. The bodies also had traces of lye. I think they even found lye in the house. Obviously, she was trying to cover up the smell of the decomposing bodies. So she was finally caught over in LA. Someone actually spotted her and called the police. And the officers even flew out there by, like, quick private jet, I guess, and took her into questioning. And, so she was finally arrested at that point. And when the case fully hit the news, when it came out how many bodies they were finding in the garden, they found 7 bodies in the garden. They got contacted by the family of a man called Everson Gilmouth.
Okay.
So he was supposedly engaged to Dorothea, but his family hadn't heard from him in a number of months. He became pen pals with her while she was in prison. So he would know her crimes of drugging, but yeah, he became friends with her, pen pals, and then she said, I want to change my life. I've done some bad things in my time, but I'm ready to start afresh. I'm sorry for what I've done.
You've done only bad things since day dot.
Yeah, when she was released from prison, Everson actually went to live with her, and yeah, he didn't last that long until he met his demise. So they actually, then after Everson's family got in contact, detectives from Sutter County actually reached out to them and said, we have a John Doe. And they were found in 1986, but it's a similar situation to how these bodies have been discovered. They were wrapped in plastic and duct tape. This body, though, was actually in a makeshift box, uncovered, and just abandoned by the side of a river. And it was Everson. And they estimated that he probably killed about 3 to 4 weeks after he moved in with Dorothea. So, yeah, she was quick to act for him, unfortunately. But it gets worse because Dorothea, after the fact, was sending postcards to his family, giving them updates of how he is, saying, he's really happy, and then, he's having troubles with his heart. But she would keep in touch with them, knowing that she's killed him and dumped his body by a river. So the gall of this woman, honestly, she is something else. So after all this, they realised, so her drugs of choice were Dalmane. Have you ever heard of that? Dalmane? And diazepam. So they were starting to do tests on the bodies, and they found traces of that. So this obviously all went to trial. The district attorney looked at the evidence for Everson and for Ruth, and thought there was enough similarities for them to also be considered.
Connect the dots.
Yeah, as the same as the 7 bodies that they found in the garden. So she was tried for 9 counts of murder in the first degree. So she was actually facing the death penalty. So the names of the victims. So we had Ruth Monroe, Everson Gilmouth, Liana Carpenter, Dorothy Miller, Bert Montoya, Benjamin Fink, James Gallup, Vera Faye Martin, and Betty Palmer. So those were all of the murders that she was accused of.
Those are the known ones.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
So it went to trial, started in 1992, and they estimated that she had actually claimed about 100k in these checks. She said all the victims, the ones in the garden certainly, they all were ill, or they just died of old age, and she couldn't call it into the police because she was in violation of her parole. So instead she just started claiming the checks whilst they were dead, but she didn't kill them. And that is what she claimed for a very long time, I think.
What do these people think? Like, that bodies just pile up around everyone?
Literally. So she was like, the only thing I could do was just to bury them in the garden and keep claiming the checks. Amazingly, the jury only found her guilty of 3 of the 9 murders.
Who was on that jury?
It was one juror that said, I will only find her guilty for a maximum of 3 murders. I don't believe she committed them all.
What?
He obviously fell for that grandma
Yeah.
charm. However, what doesn't make sense, to me anyway, is Ruth and Everson were part of the ones that she wasn't convicted for. And I don't really understand. So you're saying that she committed murders for 3 of the people in her garden, but why not?
Yeah.
It doesn't add up.
No, that's ridiculous.
In
That
my
juror
mind.
is susceptible to manipulation.
Yeah, and then obviously it all came out that all the clothes that she was donating to charity were the clothing of the victims. So, yeah, they never really got any justice for all of the victims, and she ended up dying in prison, and she never admitted her crimes. And Judy, bless her, held the funeral, for Bert. And they even raised money to get his family over to be there, and she did the eulogy, everything. But if it wasn't for Judy,
she would have just kept going.
Who knows how long this would have gone on for? Because
she wouldn't have stopped.
These were people that society had just completely forgotten about, and it was only because Judy was checking in on him and making sure he was all right that this ever came to light. And I just think, wow, what a horrible, horrible woman.
Yeah, Did she get the death penalty or not?
Nope. She just got convicted of life without parole, and she died in prison.
Yeah.
But she didn't get the death penalty. I'm not sure. I think because it was under a certain amount of murders, she evaded death penalty. I'm not sure on that though.
3.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't know, but she didn't get the death penalty. But yeah, she was scum of the earth.
That is horrendous.
9 people.
That is crazy.
Yeah.
I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, it really spiralled. And yeah, off the bat, she was a rotten apple.
Oh, yeah. She was a complete scammer and a con artist.
Yeah.
We're going to jump straight back in with another story about female killers. And this one is about Bernadette Quirk. Anyone heard of her?
Don't think so. I'm not very good with names though.
Liv? I haven't. No. Right, so I chose to do Bernadette Quirk. Just a little backstory of why I chose her. I read a book by her daughter years ago, and it just really got to me. And I listen and watch a lot of true crime that not much shocks me anymore. But this one, I don't know why. You'll tell me at the end whether it shocks you. But it just got to me and it shocked me. And sometimes I think the truth is kind of stranger than fiction.
Yeah.
So I thought it was a good one to bring in that people might be interested in. And there's not much about her online. There's news stories, but there's not much videos about it. You know, there's a book by her daughter, which I think she wrote to sort of make people understand her part in things. But we'll jump in, and I've reread the book for today. It's called Silent the Sisters, and it's by Joanne Lee, who is the daughter of Bernadette Quirk. And I've sort of compiled my own little story from her book, so obviously it's not as long, but we'll get into it. So, Joanne's mum was Bernadette Quirk, and Bernadette was only interested in men and not Joanne. She always felt care and concern towards her mum though, and her mum was not mean to her, would just not show her any attention, and knew she was just not interested in her. She enjoyed going to her nanny Edith's house, which was her dad's mum, and her mum's mum was called Nanny Pat, and she didn't like going to Nanny Pat's house because Nanny Pat was a very prim and proper woman, and she used to be one of those people that would scrape her hair back and like put spit in it to get every single strand back, and you always had to look a certain way and be a certain way to be accepted by Nanny Pat. It was very much, you can't let the neighbours see you like that kind of person, and she would always complain about something. Her mum and dad split up when she was very young. This is Joanne. She looked after her mum and did the housework, cooking and cleaning, and her mum was messy and lived in squalor. Her mum would go out and leave her on her own when she was very young, and she would go to bed and cry herself to sleep. When her mum did not have a man, she would use her to mitigate her own loneliness. So in those periods she didn't have a boyfriend, she would spend time with her, play games with her. There was still never a real bond, but when she got a new man, it was basically like, see you later, and she would go off and do her own thing. She had a younger sister called Kath, and there was quite an age difference with them. And she would look after her like her own child, because she didn't want Kath to go through what she had to go through. And she actually had another younger brother after Kath called Chris, and she would also be a mum-like figure to Chris because their mum just was not interested. So her mum had an interest in reading true crime magazines and would rather lay about and read them than look after Joanne, Kath or Chris, basically. Joanne was left largely to take care of them and take them to school, do them breakfast in the morning, make sure they had clean clothes, make sure their hair was brushed, all of it. Like, her mum didn't do a thing. And she drank a lot, Bernadette. She was a drinker, and she would go out and party with strange men, random men, and all of that. So she did have a partner at one point, Bernadette, called Craig, and this was Kath and Chris's dad. And at first Joanne didn't really like Craig when he came about because he took the attention. It was very much like, you're dropped now for Craig. But Craig would bring in money and provide for them, and he would be more interested in the kids. He sounds like a semi-decent guy.
Yeah.
Getting sucked in by Bernadette, and he would work night shifts, which would leave Bernadette to basically drink herself into a stupor all night. At 15, Bernadette seemed like one of those mums who, well, she didn't know how to be a mum, let's face it, but she would basically coerce her kids into partying with her. So she would coerce them into drinking with her, she would coerce them into having sex with their peers. And at 15, Joanne found out she was pregnant with her boyfriend Mark, who was 17 at this point. Her mum was pressing her to get an abortion, but she stood firm and refused and wanted to carry the child. Mark and Bernadette became drinking buddies, and one night whilst drinking, Joanne woke up in the bed and realised that Mark wasn't there, and to her horror, when she went downstairs, she saw Mark and her mum entwined on the sofa, and they fell asleep in each other's arms, and she thought, leave them there and let Craig find them after he comes back from his night shift. So Craig came home and did find them. He didn't make much of a fuss, but he did leave.
Okay.
So the house actually became worse, and they fell on financial hard times because Bernadette didn't do anything. So Craig was the only one keeping that shit show together. There was no money coming in and the gas and electric was switched off. And Joanne was forced to steal money from other relatives, and she would always go to Nanny Edith and steal 20 pence pieces out of her pot, and she felt really bad about it, but she would use it to buy tins of beans and cereal for her younger brother and sister. And I think she said she thinks Nanny Edith knew, but didn't say anything. And she also had a friend called Julie, and her mum was like one of those neighbourhood mums that would look out for her and cook her. She said every time she fries an egg, she has fond memories of Julie giving them an egg butty before breakfast, before school. So, yeah, she did have people looking out for her, but not just the one person who should have done. So, the story becomes bizarre. As Joanne was 15, it was suspected when Craig left he called social services because she was pregnant and Craig wanted to basically get back at Bernadette. So he called social services, and he was also probably worried about his own kids.
Yeah.
And I think it came out that Julie told Joanne years later that she also reported her mum to social services numerous of times.
Okay.
So the police came to the door and they said they need to investigate Joanne having underage sex and becoming pregnant. She denied the claims, so Joanne denied the claims because she wanted to stay with Kath and Chris. She didn't want to leave them. And they requested that she take a urine sample down to the doctors to obviously do a pregnancy test. So Joanne asked Bernadette if she could take her urine down there, as she owes her one for sleeping with Mark, basically. So to Joanne's surprise, she agreed. And to both of their surprise,
oh no,
it came back positive. And Joanne did not dare ask her who the father was. Social services said she can no longer stay at her mum's, so she pled to go to Nanny Edith's. However, this was deemed unsuitable as Nanny Edith was deaf, and it was speculated she would sneak out and meet Mark without Nanny Edith knowing, so she was sent to live with Nanny Pat.
Oh no.
So, Nanny Pat, refusing to let anyone go into care from the family because she didn't want it to look bad to the neighbours, she stepped up and took Joanne in, but Pat did not care for Joanne's welfare, but for her own image. It wasn't like a noble thing she did. And one night, Joanne asked to go visit Kath and Chris, and when she was giving them a bath, she heard laughing from behind the bathroom door. On investigation, it was Mark, who explained to her mum had called him to be like, oh, Joanne's coming home, come and see her. She'd really want to see you, but you have to hide upstairs because Nanny Pat's coming. And Joanne looks back on that and thinks how naive she must have been, because her mum wouldn't do anything nice for her. So it was likely that he was there drinking and sleeping with her mum, and they came back to visit the kids and he had to hide. So that's what she speculates now. One night, Joanne was at Nanny Pat's and was in horrible pain in her stomach, and Nanny Pat, a nursing officer, told her to take 2 paracetamol and go to bed. In the night, Joanne woke up bleeding and crawling on the floor from the pain. And Nanny Pat came in and said, okay, I'll call the doctor shortly. Joanne was going in and out of consciousness, and she doesn't know how long actually passed before a doctor came out, but one of the times she's woke up, she saw a man standing at the end of her bed, and he was furious that a nursing officer didn't call an ambulance sooner.
Do something, yeah.
Yeah. So she went into hospital, and Nanny Pat, again not caring about anything but everything looking good from the outside, she changed Joanne's clothes, so when she went out into the ambulance she was all neat in appearance, instead of wearing her blood-soaked clothes to the hospital. Her uncle went to get Bernadette when it was morning. So he went to get Bernadette to bring her to the hospital to see Joanne. and Kath and Chris weren't even at school, so he was fuming and took Kath and Chris to school himself. And Joanne gave birth to a baby boy called Jonathan, but sadly, as he was premature and help was delayed by Nanny Pat, he shortly died 30 minutes after he had been born. Joanne returned to stay at Nanny Pat's, but now since she had grieved the death of Jonathan, she was fearless of Nanny Pat, and she would go and visit Kath and Chris, and more slowly started moving back into Bernadette's because she just didn't care what Nanny Pat had to say. She completely switched off, which you would do, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
And she was still with Mark, actually. She stayed with Mark, and at 16, she was pregnant again. On returning to her mum's one day, she found her mum covered in blood, not smelling of booze, which was weird for Bernadette. And the amount of times Joanne shades Bernadette in this book, I really like it, because she says she assumed that Bernadette had slit her wrist, so she rolled her over in bed like a big fat sausage and found that there was no visible wounds, and her mum explained it was a nosebleed that she had had. Joanne thought this was suspicious but didn't pry further. People started to realise she was putting on weight, but she would deny she was pregnant and would say it runs in the family, as Bernadette was constantly putting on weight and losing it again, and she would make the excuse that she was a yo-yo dieter. And if you remember the pregnancy from before, that was her urine.
Yeah.
That was...
Oh yeah, what happened with that?
Didn't come up. It didn't come about again. And no one aired this woman's dirty laundry. They all kept it in the house. And I think Joanne was so done with her mum, she was like, it's her business.
Yeah.
She does what she wants. But obviously, just remember, she found her covered in blood one day. So this time she gave birth to a baby girl called Natalie at full term and threw herself into motherhood, as well as her two younger siblings. Craig, their dad, so Kath and Chris's dad, did come to visit them, but Bernadette would instruct them all to be quiet so he would assume there was no one home. Not because she didn't want him to see them, but more because she thought he would go mad at the sight of them, as Bernadette did not care to get ready, brush the knots out of their hair or put on clean clothes. When the water was shut off, Joanne moved out with Mark's mum, as Natalie was still a very young baby and they needed running water, and she was devastated to leave Kath and Chris in the care of her mum, but she did what she had to do for her own child. People told her they noticed that Bernadette's belly was looking swollen and bulging. Joanne didn't see the point in prying. Joanne gave birth to another baby girl, Samantha, and soon came up with a plan to leave Mark, as they were arguing a lot and his drinking was out of control. She borrowed some money and rented her own place and left Mark, who would come round to see the girls every so often, and soon started trying to worm his way back in, and before long he was living with her. Mark also liked to drink a lot, so that was the main source of a lot of their arguments, and he just wasn't a very nice man, by the sounds of things. Well, obviously he slept with her mum, but other than that, he wasn't very caring, he wasn't doting, he just wasn't a nice individual. Joanne and Mark held a New Year's Eve party one year, and Joanne felt too bad to leave her mum out. And a running theme of this story is that Joanne always feels responsible for her mum, even though her mum has never taken that responsibility over her. And she always just feels bad, so takes on that caring role and just covers for her. So they all were drinking, and the next morning Kath came and spoke to Joanne, who were really close, like a mother and daughter relationship. And she said, I heard Mum telling people last night she was pregnant. And Joanne, knowing her mum was a compulsive liar, just assumed that she was seeking attention, but was scared it was the truth. A couple of months went by, and her daughter Natalie at this point was 9 and had her Holy Communion. And there Bernadette was in a black dress. She would usually wear baggy and unfitting clothes, and no one could really notice the obvious weight changes, but in this black dress there was a real obvious bulging baby bump. So they waited with bated breath for their mum to go into labour. I don't think it was ever confirmed still from Bernadette, sorry. I get those two names mixed up, but from Bernadette that she was actually pregnant. So one week, Bernadette called Joanne and asked if she could take Kath and Chris to her house for a week as she had a bad chest and couldn't look after them. Not that she did anyway. So Joanne thought this must be it, the moment they had waited for. However, a week passed and no news of a baby or a childbirth came. Bernadette asked for Kath and Chris to return home, and reluctantly, although they wanted to stay with Joanne, they still were quite scared of their mum.
Yeah.
So they traipsed back to the squalor that they were living in. And when I say it was squalor, it was like there was cat and dog feces everywhere. There was a nappy that Joanne found on one of the house moves just like moulded into the carpet.
Oh.
Like, it was horrific. Rubbish everywhere. It was just awful. So, Kath, on the way, said to Joanne, she must have given the baby up for adoption. That's the only thing that could have happened, or she's waiting to surprise us with the baby, maybe. And Joanne thought they couldn't have done that in this short period of time, in this week. They couldn't have given the baby up for adoption and gone through with it. When Kath got home, she rung Joanne and said something awful had happened. The smell was putrid and foul, and she knew that something bad had happened in the house. Bernadette had told Kath she had some meat that went off and had cooked it, so that's what the smell was. But Kath said she knew it wasn't and begged Joanne for help. Joanne instructed her to sit tight and stay in her room and not to look round for anything, and she would come and get her when Mark got home to have the girls. Kath rung her a few moments later and was hysterical and screaming. Kath was traumatised and she said she had found it. Whilst her mum went out to get fags, she had decided to look in her mum's room, and the smell was awful, and led her to the wardrobe, where she had a small red dustbin in the corner with maggots crawling over the lid. When she reached in the bin, she felt a bin liner, and through the bin liner she felt the shape of a baby's head.
Oh.
They both did not know what to do, and Kath stayed with Joanne. Unsure what to do, Joanne told Mark there was a dead baby in her mum's wardrobe, but he was just like, nah, with raised eyebrows, and never did anything more about it. Just left them. Yeah, just was like, nah.
No, there isn't.
Yeah, literally, that's what he said. So Joanne knew that she had to be the one to deal with it alone, because she didn't want Kath to be any more traumatised than she already was. And she just said Kath wanted to come for a sleepover at my house and to not raise any suspicion. So to get her mum to talk, she thought, I know, I'll make her an offer I can't refuse. I'll take her down the pub. So she had a few vodkas and she was waiting for the confession to sort of come out in the pub, but it never came. When they returned home, Joanne plucked up the courage and confronted her mum and asked what happened to her baby. Bernadette tried to lie and say she did not know what she was talking about, so Joanne pressed on and said, we know about it, Kath found it. Joanne all of a sudden went from anger to sadness, and Joanne, remembering the grief she had felt for her baby boy, she felt empathy for her mum and what she was about to tell her. Bernadette said, it's upstairs, it was stillborn. So Joanne said, we need to give it a proper goodbye and a burial, and you need some help. Her mum shrugged her off and said, it's nothing to do with me. If you want to bury it, you do it.
It's a normal reaction.
Yep, even though it's her child in a bin. So Joanne came up with the idea of burying it with a family member, her grandma, in the cemetery. She found out Bernadette had called her Helen, and she had to say goodbye to her. She took Mark's friend's Tom's car. I don't know how to say that. She took her husband's friend's, who was called Tom, and she took his car. Because Mark said no to her taking his car. And Tom's a really nice guy. Just a little hint for later. So he lets her use her car because Joanne said she needed to take her mum to an appointment. Bernadette met her at the door and was holding a white plastic carrier bag as if they were off to the shops. That carrier bag contained the remains of Helen, and she was just stood there like it was a day out. So she remained unbothered in the car, and Joanne was trying not to heave with the smell, and at the graveside she was unbothered still and didn't say any words, and Joanne was the one to bury it and dig the burial with her hands and say goodbye to it. They did this in broad daylight in the cemetery, so had to be quick to not raise suspicion. And again, people ask, why would you not just go to the police about this? But Joanne felt this need to look after this piece of shit woman who she really shouldn't have done. So after returning, she didn't say a word to Joanne. Not thank you, not bye. She just got out the car and left. So Joanne had to clean up the car because it really smelt wretched, and when she returned it to Tom, he was like, oh, thanks for cleaning my car, and she was like, yeah, I spilt some milk, I'm really sorry, but I've cleaned it. And she burnt her clothes because they stunk, and she was in the shower and she was having to shampoo herself so many times, she just did not feel clean, and she started having dreams about it, the guilt was eating her alive. So she made Kath promise, if it ever were to come out, do not say that you knew about it. Let me take the fall. So her and Kath were sort of sworn to secrecy together. Kath became upset and told Joanne she had woken up a few nights prior to her coming to Joanne's house, and she heard what she thought was a baby's cry, but thought it must be Kat's, so returned to sleep. They both agreed they would never know the truth, so had to take their mum's word for it that it was stillborn. Life went on, and the guilt never really went away. Kath moved out and had 2 kids of her own. One day, Joanne checked in on her mum, and she had told her another family member had lost their baby and they were burying it in the grandma's grave that they buried Helen in. Joanne began to panic, but her mum waved her off because the weakest link was on. Yeah. As time passed, nothing came of this. No police came to Joanne's door as she was expecting, and nothing happened. But that was a real panic for Joanne, thinking, this is it, I'm going to be taken to prison. Joanne suspected that Mark and her mum were still sleeping together and began to go sick of thinking Helen might have been Mark's child, which would have ended up being her half-sister and her stepdaughter, so really messed up. And she found out that Mark was also messaging this girl on MSN, and Joanne, sick of Mark at this point, didn't want him, but she had to try and leave the relationship amicably because of the girls, and she really wanted to keep it together for the girls. But she messaged this woman on MSN as Mark to try and seduce her. To basically just hurry their relationship along. Yeah. And out of the blue one day, Tom rang her at work and asked if she wanted to go for a drink, and they hit it off, and they had a bit of an affair for a little while. Mark had his suspicions, and she was like, look, I know you're cheating on me as well, we both don't love each other, let's call it quits. He didn't leave the house when Joanne told him to, so Joanne thought, fuck it, Bernadette owes me so many favours at this point, I'm going to get her around because Mark listens to her and they're closer. And she says in her book they also slept together more times than we did probably, so they're closer, mum can do it. So her mum came round and said you need to leave, and he listened to her. That's so yeah. So, after she left Mark, there was a time that Joanne, Kath and their mum was all moving at the same time. So Joanne, Kath and Chris were roped into helping their mum move. Kath was helping her clean up her bedroom and Kath saw the familiar red bin. And when she approached it, her mum darted across the room. Kath said she hadn't seen her move so quick in years. They do shade them up so much, it's great. They kept the bin in the house and returned when Bernadette was out the way. And they also had a word with each other and said, we think it's time that Chris knows, because Chris was of an age now where they felt they needed to bring him into it. So they all went back to the house, and Kath said she didn't want to look in it again. And Joanne, not wanting to traumatise Chris as well, she said she would be the one to look in it. So when they went back and looked inside, there was a couple of empty air fresheners on the top layers and bin bags, layers of them, which were not wet, but they were sticky. Joanne decided she couldn't do it, so she closed up the bin and tried to forget about it because she just couldn't live through that again. They all went back to they all went back to see Bernadette, bought her the bin, and Joanne pushed it over and her mum literally leapt on it and was like, be careful. So, yeah, it's suspicious. So they all got together, Kath, Chris and Joanne, and said, we need to look for evidence of when mum's been pregnant over the years. So they looked back through pictures of when her belly would be rising and falling and looking for any indication that she was pregnant at that time, mapping out when she had been with other men, but they were very unserious flings. So 2 years later, Bernadette was facing eviction and was stressed over rent arrears. She was found by Chris unconscious and unable to rouse, with a note saying she could not carry on and surrounded by empty paracetamol blister packs. Joanne had to get some clothes for her when she was at the hospital because she was alive. Even the paramedics were like, I know you can hear me, Bernadette.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, it was all about the rent arrears, not about some sort of guilt. But, yeah, she got taken to the hospital and Joanne came back to get her some clothes. And when she went in her wardrobe, she again saw that damn bin. And she opened it and saw layers of tea towels, and she again couldn't bring herself to look through it and look inside. So they decided to confess the story of the bin and what they had found and Helen to their mum's sister, who said that she would talk to her. However, she never brought it up. She never did anything. She obviously had nanny Pat's genes and just thought, nothing to do with me. So she went to a party with her childhood friend Julie, and obviously, like I said, Julie's mum was always there for her, and Julie could tell that there was something bothering Joanne, and at this point it was like a pressure cooker, she said, and she just needed to tell someone. So they left the party early, and she told Julie everything, and Julie was like, right, we need to tell my mum. She told her mum that she was coming over, and her mum, without judgment, listened to everything Joanne had to say.
Yeah.
And then said, if you're ready, we need to contact the police because they need to know about this. So with their support, she did go to the police eventually. And when she was questioned, she was arrested on the suspicion of murder. So she was released on bail, and when she was being questioned, they obviously couldn't tell her anything. They couldn't tell her if her mum was in. They did go and speak to her mum, and after they spoke to her mum, that's when she was arrested. So she was like, what did my mum tell you? Like, oh my God, she's placing this on me. But her mum was in custody as well. And when Joanne was let out on bail, they did eventually tell Joanne that they found 3 more babies in the bin. And I believe one was
in the bin together?
Yeah. And I think one was in a shoebox, if I remember rightly. But that's as well as Helen in the cemetery, obviously. So there was 4 altogether. So what happened to Bernadette. She was charged with concealing births and nothing more. Because
Really?
from her word, and police had to take her word, because she was such an upstanding citizen, they were all stillborn.
But surely they could have done post-mortems.
So they did, and there was no evidence either way. There was no evidence to say that there was signs of life, but there was also no evidence to say that they were stillborn. And they had been rotting in a bin for many years. Because they did DNA tests on them, and all 4 children had separate dads.
Right.
Although Bernadette claimed that 2 were twins, and they were like, it's really unlikely that you have twins that are from different dads. It can happen,
Yeah.
but very unlikely, and that they would both be stillborn.
Yeah.
And we don't think you're an honest person, but we got to take your word for it. That's what they told Joanne. Our hands are tied. We need to take her word for it. So they found out that one of the baby's dads was Craig's, Chris and Kath's dad. And they all had different fathers, and she did find out that Mark was father of one of the babies, which is not a
Maybe
shock
two.
to anyone. No, they all had different dads.
No, but all about Helen. She didn't know about that one. Or did they test them
Yeah,
all?
they would tested her
okay.
as well. They all
Right.
had different dads. So, she had never told anyone, not the fathers or the GP, that she was pregnant. So that's what she got charged with, concealing the births. And they put down the fact that even though 4 stillbirths were unlikely, that her chaotic lifestyle could be to blame with it, because she was drinking a lot and smoking heavily. And yeah, she avoided any prison sentence.
Wow.
This was in Liverpool, Merseyside in the UK, by the way. I didn't say that at the start. But yeah, that's the story of Bernadette Quirk, and I just have no words. And I've never have no words about anything. But we're all silent in the studio, because, yeah.
And what can you say about that? It's disgusting. What a horrible woman.
And she didn't get prison time. Not even anything for concealing bodies or, delaying.
The course of justice.
Yeah. Or, yeah. And I believe that Joanne and Kath don't speak to her. Joanne obviously wrote this book because she was being called a baby killer in Liverpool when it hit the newspapers, and I think she wrote the book to sort of make people understand that it's not as clear cut as you think.
Yeah.
And that she really did feel guilty for what she did, and she thought about her sister every day, or every anniversary of when she found out. She thought about her, and she smelled the smell. She has to live with that her whole life. So she wrote that book. They've gone on ITV this morning, I believe, or they've gone on a British morning show to talk about the book. But I believe Chris, her son, is still in contact with her.
I guess he was kind of kept out of it, so...
Yeah, but once you find that out, it's just
Yeah, it's
disturbing.
hard
And
to
she
go
was
back.
never a good mum anyway. But yeah, they must have some really difficult relations with her. But yeah, she was just a wretched, horrible human being who should never have been able to have one baby, let alone 7.
Yeah.
At least 7. Yeah.
Gross.
How could she not be convicted of anything? Because she clearly had no intention of bringing those children up if she didn't tell anyone. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just had to take her word for it. That's what the news reports say. And I think her defence was that she went through a hard time in her life. Not like the hard time she put all 3 of her living children through.
What did the dads say?
So Craig was distraught,
Yeah.
and once the medical examiners did their bit, they had their bodies released to do a big funeral service for them. And I don't think Bernadette was invited, to be honest.
Well, I mean, for good reason.
She probably wouldn't want to come. The weakest link would probably be on that day.
Oh my God.
She'd be like, I can't miss it. It's your business if you want to bury them.
That's, yeah, something else.
Yeah, I was going through a hard time and drinking lots, and I can't even tell you when the births were. I just don't remember. That was another thing she claimed. She couldn't remember when they were. But yeah, obviously it's going far back if it's Kath and Chris's dad, unless he had a one-night stand with her after, but we don't know that, obviously. But yeah, it's just a crazy story, and there's, like I said, it's not a well-known one.
No.
And I came across this book by chance. It was recommended to me about another true life story I was reading about a girl who got kidnapped and held for years. And I read this one afterwards, and I went online to try and find like documentaries about it, because I was like, this is mad. Nothing.
Well.
Did she pretend that she didn't know she was pregnant each time?
So, I don't think she said a lot, to be honest, on it. But obviously there was the times where she told people and they assumed she was doing it for attention, but that was only when she was drinking. But she didn't tell any of the dads, she didn't tell the GP. So, and whenever she had a baby bump, there were some parts in the book where Joanne would be looking at her and be like, "You're putting on weight around your stomach." And she'd be like, "Oh yeah, I am eating a lot of chocolate." So she's just a liar.
Yeah.
And I don't think she should be believed about anything. But yeah, sorry for upsetting anyone if that upsets anyone, because it's quite a awful story, obviously. And like I said, when I read it, and I'm quite cold, even though things do affect me, I don't often show it, but that really like got to me and choked me up when I read it. So I do apologise if anyone's been upset by that content, but I think it is a good story to tell, and I think it's good to like spread awareness of what a heinous miscarriage of justice occurred, in my opinion. So
there's a common theme, isn't it, in all the stories that we've told, is that
major
there's like
miscarriages of justice.
Yeah. Well, I've got one more just to finish off.
Just to get more depressing.
Just to finish off the story. This one is about Mary Ann Cotton. I don't know if you've ever heard of her before. No. So, she's English as well. So, Mary Ann Robson was born October 31st, Halloween, apt, in 1832 in Low Morsley, a small village near Sunderland in County Durham, England. She was the daughter of Michael Robson, a coal miner, and Margaret Lonsdale. Mary Ann's father died in a mining accident when she was just 8 years old, leaving her family in dire financial straits. Her mother remarried a man named George Stott, and the family moved to a nearby village of Merton. In 1852, at the age of 20, Mary Ann married her first husband, William Mowbray. Oh, like the Mowbray pork pies. Colliery labourer. The couple moved to Plymouth, Devon, and had several children, though the exact number remains uncertain due to high infant mortality rates at the time. 4 of their children reportedly died of gastric fever and other stomach ailments, raising suspicions about the causes of their deaths. William Mowbray himself died in 1865, reportedly of an intestinal disorder. Mary Ann collated a substantial insurance payout following his death, a pattern that would become alarmingly frequent in her life. After William's death, Mary Ann returned to Sunderland and quickly remarried. Her second husband, George Ward, was a patient at Sunderland Infirmary where Mary Ann worked as a nurse. Oh my God, it's all adding up. They married in August 1865, and George died within a year of their marriage, October 1866, after suffering from paralysis and intestinal problems. Again, Mary Ann collected the insurance money following her husband's death. Third marriage. In 1867, Mary Ann began working as a housekeeper for James Robinson, a shipwright who had recently lost his wife. They married in August 1867, but not before several of Robinson's children succumbed to gastric fever. The couple had a child together who also died in infancy. James Robinson eventually became suspicious of Mary Ann's financial demands, erratic behaviour, and subsequently he separated from her. Mary Ann moved to West Auckland, County Durham, where she took up with her fourth husband, Frederick Cotton, a recent widower with children. They married in 1870. Frederick and his two sons soon died of gastric fever, adding to the growing list of suspicious deaths linked to Mary Ann.
Change your method.
Yeah, switch it up. I mean, it's getting samey. She collected insurance money for each death. Mary Ann's downfall began with the death of her stepson, Charles Edward Cotton, in 1872. She attempted to have him sent to a workhouse, but when this failed, she reported his death. Charles's death aroused suspicions in the local community, particularly from Thomas Riley, a parish official. An autopsy revealed traces of arsenic in Charles's stomach, leading to an investigation into Mary Ann's past. What a dark past she has.
Too late.
Yeah. Mary Ann Cotton was arrested in July 1872 and charged with the murder of Charles Edward Cotton. During the investigation, authorities exhumed the bodies of her previous husbands and children, finding traces of arsenic in many of them. The trial began in March 1873 in Durham, and despite Mary Ann's pleas of innocence, the evidence against her was overwhelming. Mary Ann Cotton was found guilty of murder and sentenced to death. On March 24th, 1873, she was hanged. The execution was botched, and Mary Ann died from strangulation rather than a quick hanging. A grim end for a notorious killer. Mary Ann Cotton is believed to have poisoned up to 21 people, including 11 of her own children and 3 of her husbands. Her method of killing involved administering arsenic, which causes symptoms similar to gastric fever, making it difficult to detect foul play at the time.
Do you know, she proper fits that profile.
Literally, when it was just a list of all the things that you noted.
She proper fits it, and it reminds me of that. Can't remember what it's called on Netflix. That is something curry murders or something like that. Something to do. It says curry in the title, and it's about a lady in India who was just plucking people off from her husband's family, her in-laws, and she was just poisoning them through curry. Yeah. So that was that reminded me of that. Women do use poison a lot. Yeah. I guess because, you know, men have a lot of the time the brawn. Yeah, women, we are the sneaky ones. Yeah, we need something to bring you down from the inside. I mean, my cooking alone, it doesn't need anything in it. It's probably enough to take someone down. But yeah, not a somber episode, and we hope you enjoyed it. In a weird way. Yeah. We hope you found it interesting. Yeah, interesting at the very least. And if you like any of the content, as always, give us a like and subscribe. Yeah, and we hope you come back for the next one. See you later. Bye. Spooky and kooky, mystery and wonder. Feel the magic under. Spooky and kooky.